Movember. I'm doing a makeup video for day 19. And on that day, I did an alumni presentation for an old hospital that I worked at and had a long-term relationship with, called South Pacific Private. And so the talk was on their relationship part of the model, and I sort of wove in my own personal story and my own personal recovery into that presentation. And so I'm going to deliver that now just as a makeup video for Movember. So when I was at South Pacific, I would always say, look, I'm an enthusiast, not a scientist. I'm a counsellor, not a psychiatrist. So there'll be things that I might say that you might need to check out, use some due diligence. And there's certainly things that I believe, and but sometimes when you're dyslexic and ADHD and have post-traumatic stress like I do, we can say some things that need to be checked out. So please do that. South Pacific Private is based on the Meadows model of PM Melody that was experienced by Bill Woods and Lorraine Wood when they went over to there to get support for Bill, and it's a well-documented journey by Lorraine and her autobiography. So Lorraine Wood's autobiography is a great book for you to get the history of South Pacific Private. But they brought that program back to Australia at a time when we had nothing like it, very passionately, because they wanted people in Australia to be able to get hold of it. Over there, you'll see this famous quote by M. Scott Peck out of A Road Less Travelled called "Mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs." And what we know about developmental trauma and addictions, mental health issues, chronic physical health issues is that they distort reality, induce trance, and make it really hard to work out what's real and what's not real. So this would be a saying that's up on the wall over there, and I certainly want to start this presentation with that. Why I do this sort of work is because I was that guy. He was about 19 there. I was really in a bad shape. Later on that day, that heater on the ground tipped over in the lounge room and nearly killed me. The fumes, it was probably a God moment where I was woken just before the fumes would have sort of suffocated me, poisoned me, and maybe burnt down the whole house. And I mention that because that guy got to a detox at 22 and has been in recovery ever since. And it's been 36 years of recovery, up and down and all around. But that guy turned into this guy. You know, at 22, I recognised that the job I had as a Boilermaker was because I got thrown out of school for a prank, for a carton of beer. And I went back and got trained up to be a counsellor, and have done that work ever since. When I first started at South Pacific, I was a primary therapist. I was called in by Bill Woods, and over the time of about 4 different points of employment, I held all the roles up into the program director in the end, and was very proud to do so. But I started there as this guy. In early recovery, back in the day when we used to pass cassettes around, when we heard information that we really thought was good for recovery, you know, I in the spirit of that, made my own tapes around these workshops I used to run for South Pacific. And I ran them in other places as well, but South Pacific really was the place I enjoyed doing it the most because they had that deep, overarching program. And, you know, that guy's different than the guy I look like now, you know, and the phase I was in, I was really trying to break free of growing up in the western suburbs and being stuck in stretch black jeans and black t-shirts, and I was just experimenting. You know, I'm sure my wife's glad I don't have long hair anymore. It's my Fabio phase. But those tapes I've not really ever re-released because they were so personal. I don't know if I'd ever want to have my heart so open like that. But back then I would do poems and songs and storytelling, weaving it all together about the journey of recovery. And it was really a big part of my development. Maybe one day I'll put them on the website as an MP3 for people to listen to, and you make your own decision. But I certainly was inspired by Robert Bly, John Lee, all those guys that poured their hearts out. And the workshops were always really risky, and because they were so real. I don't know if I would have the backbone to pull them off these days, but I certainly did then. When I first started there, I was taught by that man in the middle, Wes Taylor. He came out with Joanna Mills, and they brought PM Melody's program out in the era that I was there, which is about a year or two after it opened. And John Falcone was somebody who also was a program director of mine a couple of times, still does supervision there, and has been a long-term expert in this field, and both those men. John was a therapist, a mentor, a boss to me. It was a fantastic era in my life. I look back at this picture because it was a bit after that long-haired shot, and I was trying to get more serious, although the vest wouldn't appeal to that. But all the things in that picture, you know, it was the era I was in. I was trying to find spirituality. I was trying to, you know, earnestly seek for something different than I'd grown up in. And my faith is different than that guy's now, but the heart's the same. I was still passionately looking for something that was going to help others and help myself. And when I left there, I was that guy, you know, older, arguably wiser. When I first started there, I had to learn everything. When I left there, I could run any part of that program because I knew it. I just knew it. I used to like teaching it, from everyone to the reception staff to the psychiatrist. It was just something I was passionate about. And I like the fact you could dress up there. Now, dungarees is my thing. And but when I did this talk on the 19th, I certainly put a tie on for that occasion. Now, Lorraine and I met in a 12-step fellowship, and when they started South Pacific Private after they had that experience over in America of getting a deeper program experience, I took over as the Australian chairperson in Codependence Anonymous, and our paths crossed. It was a little bit like the silver spoon and the plastic spoon of the West, but we both had a passion for recovery. And you know, Lorraine would hire me to walk the halls, she said. I used to get frustrated at that because they didn't pay me for walking the halls, but I knew what she meant. She knew that if someone was going to, you know, run out that door or go and harm themselves, or they were stuck in a pub and couldn't get to intake, I would do my best to go and get them. I would be there in the middle of the night if someone was having a PTSD flashback and attacking the staff. I would try to, you know, regularly my name would be called over that loudspeaker, and I would go to whatever drama it was and try and help. And I'm sure I didn't get it all right, and I'm sure there's some people who like me and some people who don't. And it's hard sharing that dilemma of adult treatment with adults that have got lots of denial and are unwell. But we did our best, and this was a shot from a Christmas party that, you know, when Lorraine passed, we were able to talk on the phone and make amends to each other because it was we struggled. I'm a hard person to work with, and she would say she'd be the same, but our passion is what got us through. And I also think that there was times that my relationship with her was misunderstood. No one really knew how far we went back. And she was at my second wedding, and I remember I would carry her bag. In my last tenure there, when I was the program director, I'd carry her bag to her car. And I'm sure that was misunderstood as some sort of codependent or brown-nosing act, but I had a lot of respect for her. I treated her as though I would treat my own mother. And I think, you know, in the end we were able to make peace, and I really hope that her daughters are able to continue their mother's legacy. And as I said, Lorraine's written her own autobiography, and is a very good read for you if you want to know more about South Pacific's history and that part of Australian history of recovery culture. I put this here because when you're at South Pacific, they will let you walk along the beach and not allowed to swim, and people commonly do what this cow does, get pretty close to it. But I put it there because sometimes in recovery it's hard to keep the perseverance. Lots of people go back to South Pacific even sober many years trying to work out the next phase of their journey and the impact of childhood trauma that's bubbled up, and relationship issues and other addictions. And so I just like, you know, to start off into this model. You know, I don't know what this cow's going through, but I can relate. And sometimes recovery is just like that. We do relate. This image is the whole model. And I got this far in the presentation before, and it mucked up, so I'm not sure. I really don't want to sort of pull it up and make it bigger. But I'm gonna spend in this video just focusing on the relationship section and secondary symptoms. But the fact of the matter is, in this model, Peter simply said children need some basic building blocks to get a sense of maturity, to grow up. And in that phase, they've got to be valued, they've got to be allowed to be vulnerable, they need to be taught about their reality, body, thinking, feelings, behaviour. They need to get their needs and wants met and be taught how to meet them age appropriately over time. That's how someone develops. But trauma and neglect and abuse and growing up in addictive family systems, that interferes with that whole process and throws people into a real dilemma. And around those 5 issues, people they feel less than, they feel too vulnerable, bad and flawed, and they feel too needy, and life is out of control. And they identify that as the wounded child, and certainly say that that's sort of how it felt in those times of distress in childhood. But we adapt. Everyone adapts. We have to survive. So we become better than instead of less than. Too vulnerable instead of invulnerable. Bad and flawed gets covered up by acting good and perfect or rebellious like it doesn't matter. Too needy's covered up by acting needless and wantless or confusing needs and wants. And we're trying to get a sense of control. We're reaching for safety. That's exhausting. You can't survive in that. It's a survival thing, not a thriving thing. So you will get those secondary symptoms, to which in the model as it is now, they bunch all together with the relationship symptoms. I'm going to break that down in a second. But essentially, the untreated primary symptoms lead to these secondary symptoms, resulting in relational issues. And that's what gets addressed here. At the end of the model, they talk about, look, no one's coming. God could and would if he sought. But we have to take responsibility for our own recovery and our own maturing process in recovery. And that's the development of the functional adult. Self-esteem, boundaries, learning about our reality and how to share it moderately so we can participate in our own life and come to our own rescue. So that was that's just to show you that breakdown of, the secondary symptoms and relational symptoms. And just that the functional adult aspect I just went through around the esteeming from within, able to protect and contain self, accepts imperfection in self and others, is aware of and appropriately meets the needs of self and others, and is able to be spontaneous, open and moderate, right? And she just says that, through the functional adult does develop through treatment, recovery, intimacy and reparenting. And so it supports this development. It's going to happen over time. In the model, when we used to break it down, just to give it that narrative that childhood trauma and immaturity drive unmanageability, and that unmanageability is those secondary symptoms: depression, anxiety, chemical addiction, spiritual problems, intensity issues, physical illness, money disorders, eating disorders, behavioral addictions, raging. Lots of people come in, that's their big problem. They're raging all the time. So they're saying that childhood trauma, immaturity and unmanageability create relational problems. If I've got those untreated primary symptoms leading into secondary symptoms, man, getting on with people is going to be hard. There'll be problems with intimacy. I'm going to feel enmeshed a lot of the time with someone. I'm going to be dishonest because I don't want to tell you about who I really am. There's going to be problems with interdependence. We'll either be too dependent or anti-dependent. And that we will, a lot of us have, due to abandonment and enmeshment in our childhood, love and avoidance addiction in adulthood. So that's where they say we've got to create that functional adult to rescue ourselves here. No one else can do it for us. I remember a while back I broke it down even further into these sections because I really like that the secondary symptoms that are really relational based on childhood trauma is negative control. And that simply means that in regards to who I am, if I'm with you, I need to sort of go one up above you and try and get you to think, feel and be different around me, or I go to one below you and try and manipulate you passively to do that. And that negative control is really infuriating and crazy making in any relationship. That there will be resentment and rage. John Lee said on the weekend that if you're in a family role, if you're in a wounded child role, an adult adapter, there will be rage because we're not processing in an integritous way. Spirituality issues really are, we just don't know who we are. We're not grounded in who we are. Our inherent sense of worth is not inside. It's not there. And the locus of control, as Pia Mellody says, is outside of us. It's away from us. And that makes living, that's why negative control is such a heavy thing. I've got to get you to be different so I'll be okay. And of course, that's where we develop addictions and anything that can be, as John Breer, the psychiatrist, says, distress reduction to behaviors. We will have to develop things to cope and be in the world the way we are. And that's going to result in intimacy issues. And so when it goes over to those relational issues, and I just want to check if I've pulled these up next. Yes, I do, right? So what I just went through is that slide of the negative control, the resentment and rage, spirituality, the addiction, depression, and anxiety with physical illness. Like they're the things like chronic stress illnesses that aren't cured by any sort of minor or major medical intervention. So chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and allergies, eczemas, asthmas, I think a lot of those are connected to these untreated symptoms. And the intimacy issues I talked about. So what they're saying about relational esteem, that one up or one down, I'm either better or less than you, I have trouble either enmeshing or I have to be away from you, I'm going to be dishonest about who I am because how can I tell you everything that's going on? It's too much. And the problems with interdependence certainly mean that I'm either too dependent or anti-dependent and swing like Tarzan between the two. Very confusing for anyone who's going out with you. And of course, the whole thing is intense. So when it comes to treatment, we're trying to understand what's going on in here with all that happening. How do we get a sense of reality? And Pia really made her model of reality so simple. She just stood in front of the mirror and said, look, I've got a physical body, I've got my conscious mind and thinking, I've got how I feel, and I've got what I do. And she just tried to break it down. And I must say, this has always helped me. And the idea that when I experience something outside of me, it comes in the five senses, I'm going to run it through that embodied brain, I'm going to have a response to it, I'm going to give it a meaning. The meaning will be based on my personal history, on learnt and things that I've learnt, things I've experienced, and the core beliefs I've sort of grown up with. And that's why childhood trauma is so disorientating, because we've got some pretty crazy core beliefs. I'm bad, I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough, I'm unsafe, I'm invisible, those sorts of examples. Pretty heavy. If you're experiencing something outside of you, run it through that filter. Feel shame, feel guilt, feel bad, feel anger, feel fear. Pretty heavy. And by the time we get to behavior, we're really not functioning well. Add on top of that what we know now about the embodied brain, and the fact we've been able to MRI living people for a while, it shows us how trauma really affects the way we respond. We know now that in that body reaction, we can have a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And so we go from implicit and sort of explicit memory about what's happened, even implicit memory. There was a saying I really liked, I think it was Dan Siegel or Stephen Porges, and they said that, am I running because I'm afraid, or am I afraid because I'm running? And this would be, I'm afraid because I'm running. That our body will move faster in that midbrain, that hand model of the brain, the limbic system. When we flip our lid, we're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Pete Walker in his work certainly says it's really important in recovery to get a sense of that. What trauma type am I, so I can learn to come to my rescue when I'm in this space, because otherwise we will go back to addictions and different things to cope. Now, I've used this phrase for a long time. If it's hysterical, it's historical. That if I'm taking a bazooka to a knife fight, I'm probably in that implicit somatic response to trauma. And I think for addicts a lot of the time, we really need to get that message. If I'm being hysterical, it's historical. It isn't about what's happening in front of me. It's about my history playing itself out with what's in front of me. And if I can make that distinction, I can come to my own rescue. Pia breaks down that body, thinking, feeling, and behavior into when I went through this and put this together for South Pacific, it was okay. Well, what that mean? What happens in the body? Well, we've got those complex PTSD reactions that we're powerless over. The triune brain, which we now is like a 5-part brain. That it's not just the frontal cortex, limbic system, and sort of reptilian brain. We've got the heart neurons, the gut neurons. So we're always expanding, but it's mainly just to highlight that we're going to have a fight, flight, freeze response before our conscious thought kicks in. We can have post-acute withdrawal symptom between 0 to 18 months in recovery that really makes we're going to have trouble managing that before we get to cognition. And physical illness and unwellness can sort of hit us at this point. The thinking part of Pia's reality, cognitive distortions and defenses that we grew up with and developed ourselves, but we also witnessed others. If I was working with folks in South Pacific and they couldn't work out what theirs was, I said, well, do your inventory on mum and dad or major caregivers. And because if that's your inheritance, you've largely got a version of that, because we grew up watching it. And the adult adapted child tells us that part of how we respond to life now is how we were parented back then. So that's the inheritance. Looking for that seed of obsession, learning about people, places, and things that trigger us into responses, either in our codependent developmental trauma responses or addictive reactions now. First thought wrong disease, so checking that thinking. Cognitive distortions, defense mechanisms, as I mentioned, and those core beliefs of the inner child. one of the things I used to like about South Park was just they had them up on the wall. They mightn't have them there anymore, but we used to really talk about core beliefs around our value, our safety, our identity, or our dependency needs. So the I am bad, I'm unworthy, I am unsafe, I am invisible, I'm unworthy of love. These things will replicate those different parts of our reality. Feelings are a big one. Adult appropriate feelings versus toxic and repressed realities. I really liked how we used to have those up on the wall. That the healthy response is anger, but rage is the toxic version. Anxiety is a toxic version of fear. Even with love, enmeshment is the toxic reality. So when you go through and you go, oh wow, I'm not in love, I'm enmeshed, I'm not angry, I'm raging, I'm not afraid, I'm anxious right now, can help us to go, oh wow, I'm in my hysterical reaction. I'm in my history right now, not this moment. And then the same goes for those other feelings. Instead of feeling healthy shame, I'll feel worthless. Instead of feeling healthy guilt, I'll feel isolated and completely disconnected and shut down. So it helps to get hold of that. And I've always liked that saying that you come to treatment to feel better, but we need to get better at feeling. I want sort of sometimes the program to work like heroin. It's not going to do that. I'm going to need to be present and learn to engage with this. And actually there's gifts of feelings. The gift of anger is strength. The gift of pain is healing. The gift of guilt lets us know we need to make amends. So all of those things become really useful, really useful. I did a feelings video for this Movember campaign, and you'll find some of those concepts in that, so look for that if you want to know more. So Pete Walker certainly tells us, PM Melody certainly tells us what's my trauma type, and we need to look at what it is. And Pete certainly says that we can have variances. I can be a fight freeze or a flight fawn. And so I won't talk too much into that. I've done that in other videos in 2021 and 2020 in those campaigns. But I will go over the fact that a fight one is going to be a narcissistic defense. Flight is obsessive compulsive. Freeze is disassociative. Fawn is a codependent type defense. And where you'll get that in its positives, it's got all of those characteristics for those different four: fights, assertiveness, boundaries, courage, moxie, leadership. In its sort of in the light, it has some assets for it. We're meant to have this function in our body to protect us. Flight's the same: disengagement, healthy retreat, industriousness, know-how, perseverance. Freeze, acute awareness, mindfulness, poise, readiness, peace and presence. Fawning is love and service, compromise, listening, fairness and peacemaking. So they do serve a function, but when they're out of whack, man, I know when I've read these things for myself, and even some of the ones you think mightn't be that disruptive, like being a busyaholic, always efforting. You can see just how depleting. I won't go through all those, but they're there. You can pause this to read it. But if you, again, go to the trauma type videos that I've done where I speak more into this space. But I just mention these because this is what we're up against when we're trying to have relationships with others. If I've got developmental trauma, untreated primary needs, addictions I'm just starting to treat, then these things are present. And that's why it's so hard. And I have a bad habit as a therapist of trying to find safety and peace in reality. And so sometimes when I look at this and I go, okay, well, wow, no wonder I'm a fawn type, I'm a flight type, and I can go into fight, but usually fight people scare me. And I look at that and go, oh man, yeah, I'm driven, I'm rushing, I worry, I'm panicky, I'm obsessive compulsive. And you go, wow, no wonder my relationships are more difficult. Or that idea of fawning, the servitude, loss of self, people pleasing, not good, right? But if we can, to see your drama clearly is to be liberated from it, which is a Ken Keyes Jr. saying. So it just helps us to see what we need to work on. If we can work out what our trauma types are, it's like, okay, I've got to welcome myself to my flashback. And one of the things that I used to use at South Pacific as a tool, and I'm not going to go into this, but I'm going to flag it, is Pete Walker's 13 tips for how to deal with flashbacks. This Movember campaign, I did a talk on this for betrayed partners. In other campaigns, I've done it mainly aiming at developmentally traumatized people in recovery. It's a great list of tools of how do I come to my own rescue with this. And I love the work of Pete Walker He's written a lovely biography, but the two books are Complex Post-Traumatic Stress from Surviving to Thriving and The Tao of Fully Feeling, both excellent books if you've got addictions and childhood trauma issues. So, if I pause for a second, how does all this recovery stuff help us? I know at South Pacific we get people to do colouring in, and you could just see some of the, adults just sitting there going, what the hell are they sucking us in with? So, there's quite a lot of research on mindfulness and colouring in. So I just pause here to go, okay, there's a lot, right? It's a lot. No wonder if we identify with it, no wonder we're having trouble. At South Pacific, Dr. Robbie Abels, who used to work at South Pacific, said to me, your program sucks. And I said, why? And she said, because you bring up trauma down there and you don't give people a way to regulate the somatic experience of the trauma. And I remember driving away from that meeting really challenged and thinking, she's right. She's right. What are we going to do about that? And this is what I come up with. It was looking at the work of Peter Levine, and Stephen Porges and Dan Siegel and these guys that really worked into how do we start to literally respond to that body. And they come up with butterfly hands, which is a bracing technique of Peter Levine. There's a Havening technique, things that soothe us when we go into that stress response. So we looked at Soothe, Contain and Move On as a way of teaching people emotional regulation. Like a lot of tools like this, when people came into treatment, they made fun of it and butterfly hands and blah, blah, blah. But it's helpful when you start to have a panic attack to know what to do. So with the soothing, when our wounded child is really active, the way our body felt, that stress reaction, PTSD reaction, the idea was the left hand over the heart, right hand over the diaphragm, to start to breathe into that space and calm ourselves down and check out, am I safe? Because sometimes addicts, we get ourselves in dangerous situations. So if I got a bear chasing me, this ain't going to work. I need to work out, am I safe right now? But it is a physical response. Dr. Stephen Porges said in his polyvagal theory literature that the biggest hack we can have is to control our breathing, which controls our heart rate, which sends a message to our brain that we're not in danger. And I've seen doctors do this when they bring someone's heart rate down just by getting them to diaphragmically breathe. So this really is, if you want to know, you like those YouTube videos about life hacks, this is one. Get control of your breathing. It will send a message from those heart neurons up to your brain that we're not in danger anymore. And all of a sudden, we get our frontal cortex back down and we get our executive thinking back and we can take care of ourselves. The contain is that part when we bring that hysterical response to this current moment. So the idea, once I'm back in my frontal cortex, I can start to work out what's my reality, what's happening to me right now, what's going on in my body. Do I need to relax it? What are my thoughts? What are my concepts? Any old core beliefs or distortions happening? What am I feeling? What do I need to do or not do? What defense mechanisms are active right now? What are my needs? How do I take care of me? And what happens when we're immature? We either have a really strong outer critic or a really strong inner critic. So I got to come back. What are my needs? I'm responsible for me and my needs. And is there any boundaries I need to set now to protect or contain or move on? And then the other part of it was to remember, I got to reparent me. I need my functional adult to soothe my wounded child, contain my adult adapted child, radically accept where I'm at, because sometimes it's really tough. I don't want to be the way I am. I look at sane, normal folks, and there is some, and I wished I responded less hysterically in life. It would be much easier to live inside of my own skin, much easier for my family to live around me. So radical acceptance or serenity prayer. I wish I'd whack that serenity prayer slide in here. I might even do a little one on that, because really it's, right now, God, if I have a spiritual belief, good orderly direction if I don't. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And South Pacific used to add the willingness to take action and do whatever it takes as a way of motivating us. Once we identify the direction, do it. Don't just sit there thinking about it. And again, one of those tools when you've got a lot of that internal chatter and internal critic going on, outer critic going on, what am I grateful for right now? What can I see, touch, feel, experience that I'm grateful? And sometimes it's even, wow, I'm grateful now I've got this tool that helps me instead of just suffering internally. And the question then becomes, am I safe? Am I safe here right now? Because largely if I am, it's like, well, that's great, because I started this thing feeling really unsafe. In Pia's relational symptoms, she really talks about the love and avoidance addiction dance. And I've done a video back in Movember, so if you're really keen to sort of see me rabbit on, even with the old whiteboard, I can't do it any better than that. But I do know that when I grew up enmeshed to a mentally ill mother, and I went out into the world as a love and avoidant addict, like a Pac-Man, looking for someone that I didn't know I was looking for them, but they were abandoned and looking for someone to take care of them. And the avoidant addict comes in out of duty, and the love addict comes in out of need, and all of it's unconscious. As Jung said, if we don't make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life. We will call it fate, soulmate-itis. And we go around in this dance where the avoidant addict's trying to be present, but he can't pull it off, starts to pull away. The love addict gets triggered. They start to get more needy. The more the addict pulls away, the avoidant addict pulls away, the love addict starts bombing. Initially, like love bombs, eventually nuclear bombs. They have a psychic break when they realize that the avoidant addict's really pulling away. The avoidant addict now is incapable of staying present, largely is acting out in some other way away from the relationship. But both people have primary and secondary fears, which keeps the whole thing stuck together. So an avoidant addict's got a primary fear of engulfment, but a secondary fear of abandonment. The love addict's got a primary fear of abandonment, secondary fear of engulfment. So one runs to catch the other, and then the other one runs away, and they catch, and we can stay stuck in that for a lifetime. You can cry forever over this one, unless you start to break out and again, like all other Pia's other stuff, become aware what's driving this, what trauma, what's my abandonment, what's my enmeshment, and develop these functional adult skills so I can break out of this intensity and intimacy issue and get into this functional adult that can actually get the skills to participate in a relationship where I'm not responding out of abandonment or enmeshment. But again, look up my earlier campaign to get a deeper understanding of that. When you're under a lot of stress, and if you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll see these slogans. South Pacific certainly have them, used to have them in the stairwell and everywhere, because, man, we really need this sort of input. I'll still, to this day, sometimes walk around and listen to Louise Hay's old I Am tapes, affirmation tapes, because my inner critic can really beat me up. So when we are under stress, and sometimes having those gratitude or affirmation statements, these, when we're under stress, we can remember bumper stickers, hard to remember chapter and verse. And so these are all from Alcoholics Anonymous, and South Pacific certainly threw some of their own in there. And you could always pause or screenshot that, or just look them up, Recovery Slogans of AA. Johan Hari certainly became very famous in his TED Talks by saying the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's human connection. He's absolutely right. Absolutely right. But where do you get that human connection? And I'd say it's in sobriety places like 12-step fellowships. There was a recent study done that really highlighted that 12-step facilitated programs are still the most successful, even though people are arguing against them, they go in and out of fashion. But you can get an incredible amount of your connection needs by attending a fellowship, joining a group, getting a sponsor, starting to do outreach calls. Over the weekend, I had some guys here for a Movember event with John Lee, and at least 6 of those guys I knew for over 30 years in recovery. Now, if you told me that when I first got clean, I was going to have friends for life, I don't know if I could have believed you. But it's been a whole new world of connection. So I do believe that this idea that I need to come back into my own skin and my functional adult needs to help me with those secondary relational symptoms so I don't live them unconsciously out and create stress in my life. So some recovery tips just that I on that day that I shared that I still hold water, and it's sort of reduced. There's lots of recovery tips on the Movember videos that I do from Patrick Carnes, Pia Melody, and all those guys. But you don't go it alone. As avoidant addicts, I wanted to do everything alone. I've had to learn to do it in company. Try and find connections. Outreach calls are the best thing you can do for that. If you join a fellowship and say, can I get your number? Listen for people who share in a way that you like, get their number. Follow an aftercare plan. Why go to treatment? Get an aftercare plan. And so many people I know, they just don't follow it. They just make it up. They don't go to meetings. They don't see their psychiatrist. They don't follow their medication plan. So if you get an aftercare plan, follow it or get professional advice to amend it. But it really is one of those sort of signs of insanity that we go and get a treatment plan and then just abandon it when we leave. Be honest, open and willing, the how of the program. The Kahn says when people relapse, honesty is the first thing that a therapist should look for, because they've largely got dishonest somewhere to self, others, and God, and that they've got a real poor understanding of their powerlessness and unmanageability of what they're dealing with, and they generally, because of that, don't have an adequate recovery program. So be honest, open, and willing. You're going to be able to have people have your back on that one. Get clear on your problem. That's that thing about the first step. Get clear on it. Do your first step work. Really work out where your bottom lines and boundaries need to be, because addicts commonly really misjudge how much safety they need in regards to an old behaviour. The guy that's the alcoholic that says, well, I'm going to go to the fishing club at the pub on a Thursday anyway because I've been going for 25 years and I'll have a lemon squash. And it's like, well, good luck, right? You've been drinking there for 25 years. On a bad day, that's an unsafe place for you to be initially in recovery, maybe down the track a bit. But, get clear on what your problem is so you can get clear on what your boundaries need to be. Have a right-sized recovery. So many people I know come into recovery, they become aware of the damage they created, and they think, oh no, I can't go to meetings, I've got to look after the kids, I've got to look after my wife, I've got to get some money back in the bank, I've got to fill in the blank, I've got to do something else. And there's a saying, if you put anything before your recovery, you're likely to lose it anyway, because the partner, the job, all that'll go if you keep relapsing. So, get that right-sized recovery. Look to the program, the experienced people in front of you, and ask them. For example, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, the HOW program, lays it all out there. I did a video in this campaign on their 7 tools of SLA. They'll tell you exactly what you need to do to make it the right size. Get humble and ask for help. We can't do it on our own. You can't save your face and your ass at the same time, was the saying I used to have at South Pacific. You can't save your face and your ass at the same time, so get humble. If you don't get humble, you will get humiliated, and you'll have to get the help anyway. So get humble, ask for help. Don't wait to feel like doing recovery. It's not going to be first nature for a while. We've got to change this behavioural, as Adriana Villa used to say. So do the action, to get the good feeling. Don't wait for the good feeling to do the action. The 4 absolutes of the AAA program that came from the Oxford group, where all of our 12-step origins come from. Absolute honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. I did a video on that earlier in this campaign. It's the first one of this November 2022. And be open to a power greater than you. Just was in my home group. We do the first 3 steps, and one of the ladies there reminded me of something I was told. And in the second step, the main thing we've got to work out is that I'm not God. I need something greater than me, a good orderly direction, and hopefully you will find that connection with God that will define your life, right? It's hard to imagine that when you first get clean, because we're self-centered. We're chronically self-centered. In Narcotics Anonymous, they say the spiritual part of our disease is total self-centeredness. So don't be alarmed that at the beginning being open to a power greater than you is difficult, because it's going to be. Because we've spent a whole lot of time just investing in us being the boss, right? There's a good joke in recovery it's worth mentioning at the end of this video. A sponsor said to his sponsee, look, you've got to get a higher power. He said, I can't do it. And he said, well, look, I want you to do an experiment with me. I'm going to prove to you a miracle can happen today. And he said, well, what's the miracle? He said, listen, hand your will and life over to anything, and a miracle will occur. And he said, okay. I hand it over to this chair. And the guy goes, right, a miracle has occurred. And he said, well, what's the miracle? He said, well, look, already your life is not in the hands of an idiot, right? And in recovery, we make and repeat the same mistakes expecting a different result, and that's what his sponsor was alluding to. So be open to that power greater than you. Be humble, ask for help. Can't save your face and ask at the same time. The image I finished on in the talk on the alumni day was this Japanese will repair broken pottery with powdered gold lacquer to highlight imperfections and not hide them. And there is a name for that process. What is it? Kintsugi? Sorry, Japanese people watching this, as a Westie says that word. But I sort of think it's a nice image to reflect on. That sometimes in recovery you think, oh, I can't let people know who I really am. But as a therapist that's in 12-step fellowships and has a spiritual way of life, and as a Christian, I try and let people know now who I am. I let them see the cracks. It's in my weakness that God can do some of his best work. And so the other thing I finished with is there's a lovely series of books by a writer called Robert Fulghum, and his first ever story that got him published was a thing called All I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And it simply says, it is still true, no matter how old you are, when you go out into the world, it's best to hold hands and stick together. So we are in, at the afternoon of the last day of November. This is a makeup video. You can see all the other videos through the easiest way is through the website on Steve Stokes Counselling and Consulting. Because, I've used some of the material here from South Pacific. Please, if you have related to anything in this video, South Pacific Private is on the northern beaches in New South Wales, Sydney, and whether you live overseas in Australia, it's an incredible program that you can go to and get support for all of these issues that I've highlighted today. Their intake team will be very happy to receive your call, and they will direct you and guide you any way they can to help you with that process and of easing your way into a different life in regards to the things that are causing you pain. With that, I will say goodnight and look forward to the next Movember campaign. Bye.